Our numbers are increasing here locally, but the mayor says the precautions we're all taking is working. So let's bring in San Antonio Mayor Ron Nirenberg for today's KSAT Q&A. Good evening. Thanks for your time as always. Let's start with COVID. Our numbers are rising. So when you're talking to Metro Health, any of the local experts looking at where this pandemic is headed, what is the city preparing for in the next coming months?
Well, you're right. The cases are on the rise, and clearly we've seen in some of the communities, even around Texas, they're spiking significantly, and we want to avoid that fate. The actions that we're taking, remember, are always backward looking. And so when we look at our case rates today, this is based on the actions that we've been taking over the last couple of weeks. And in order to slow this down, this is a lot like slowing down a freight train. It's not going to happen overnight. So we've got to continue to buckle down with regard to mask wearing and physical distancing and paying attention to the occupancy limits of certain establishments and sanitation, all that stuff. And what I'm seeing in our numbers is not, it's not good that we're rising, but it's positive in the sense that we haven't seen our case rate start to grow exponentially, meaning that one person that's getting affected is transferring it to one person, but we're getting that case investigation and contact tracing done so it doesn't begin to mushroom. We've got to continue to do that as we start to rein in these infection rates in order to flatten the curve. Now, over the next couple of months, as we talked about tonight, the preparations for vaccines and getting the vaccines distributed to critical care populations first is all going to be part of our operations. And that's what we're planning for, ultimate distribution of the vaccines once they become available, hopefully sooner than later. But the important thing for everyone watching is that our part in this is to slow down the trajectory, slow down the velocity of the infections. And that's how we can keep our community as safe as possible and get out of these restrictions as quickly as possible and see this pandemic finally come to an end.
Fair, ethical, transparent. That's what you made clear about what you want this distribution of the vaccine to be. Do you have a timetable right now or a general timetable about when the distribution may begin? Could we see the vaccine started being distributed in San Antonio before the end of the year?
So that's a big question mark. We get more clarity on it as the days go by. And to be very clear, the fair, ethical, transparent, those are core values of San Antonio Metropolitan Health on all that they do, and that includes the vaccine distribution. The vaccine will be available soon, but not in large numbers. So that's why it's really important for this group to work to ensure that it's being distributed to the most vulnerable populations and frontline workers the soonest as priority. Once that begins to happen and we get more distribution and more places are able to deliver the vaccine, then we can start to roll it out into further priority populations. And ultimately, hopefully by, within 6 months or so, we'll start to see it go out into general population. The critical time period now, though, the critical time is now for us to buckle down, flatten out this curve as much as possible, and over the next month or so, see that vaccine finally come to San Antonio and get distributed to those critical care populations.
Let's turn away from COVID-19 for a second. Talk about something that we aired a story on earlier in this newscast about what is happening with the redesign of Alamo Plaza. There was a letter sent to your office from the county judge, the former mayor, Phil Hardberger, a former member of the Citizens Advisory Committee, with concerns about the plaza being fenced off, what's happening to Alamo Street, the buildings across from it. It seems like in your response you agree with where they stand. So can you explain exactly what the issue is here with those pieces of this plan?
Yeah, sure. Well, number one, yes, you're right. I do agree with the sentiment of the letter, and in fact, the substance of the letter as well. The challenge here is that with the denial of the permit by the Texas Historical Commission to move the cenotaph, that means the cenotaph is going to remain in place. And because of that, some of the elements of the plan have to be redesigned. Now, many people may remember back in 2018, I did not sign the agreement, the resolution to move forward for a while because I was seeking revisions to the lease agreement that's in place right now that has to be modified. The first one being, I want that plaza to remain open 24/7. that we can't have it blocked off from the public because it's the civic center of San Antonio, and people gather there, they celebrate there, they mourn there. It's a battlefield, but it's also the civic space of San Antonio. So part of that adjustment was to make sure that there are no fences. And so moving forward, there aren't any fences. There are portals, I think about 7 of them, that people actually walk into the plaza. It delineates what the battlefield is, but it's not blocked off from the public. That has to be the case moving forward. As we move forward and we figure out how things need to change in order to advance this plan because of the denial of the permit and the cenotaph remaining in place, we've got to keep as a core value that the Alamo is the center of civic life here in San Antonio, must remain that way. The other elements of the letter, again, with respect to the design itself and the Woolworth building and the Crockett building, which are historic in San Antonio's own unique history. I've always been of the mind that those buildings should stay, and they are owned by the state now, however. But we now have a report that was completed about a month or so ago that shows that these are structurally sound buildings that can be renovated in ways that house a museum or something else, but they do not need to be destroyed. That's been my position. I hope it continues to be part of the priorities moving forward for the GLO with regard to those buildings, but that all remains in the balance. I think the challenge is there's been some tumult as a result of the Texas Historic Commission vote, and we've got to work through that. Going forward over the next few months, we were going to do that and move this forward in a way that it becomes respectable, not just for the state of Texas and our history, but also as a living, breathing space for the city of San Antonio.
Quickly, we have about 10, 15 seconds left. I mean, is the current Alamo plan able to do what you want it to do, or is it time to just start from scratch again?
There's too much there that's been 30, 40 years in the making to scrap it all together, including the values that guide this plan forward. There needs to be modifications, though. It can't move forward as is because clearly there's some changes, including the cenotaph, and ultimately that's going to create a cascading effect on other elements of the plan. But we should work on those and try to maintain the good foundation that we built with partnership across the state.
San Antonio Mayor Ron Nirenberg, as always, thanks for your time.
We'll be right back.